Hello, fight fans, and welcome to another edition of Monday Night Fight Talk. As always, I am your host, Dylan Brewski. Very excited to be with you guys here today. We just had a very exciting UFC Fight Night. I know not a lot of people were very excited about it. It was kind of boring on paper. I'll even admit it myself. I wasn't like, oh my gosh, this Fight Night card is amazing. It definitely lacked some bigger fights, but the original main event was pulled from this fight. So you're kind of going to get... It would have been a pretty good fight night, if on paper at least, if it had the main event. I believe it was supposed to be Bryce Mitchell and Movsar Evloev, but Evloev could not make the fight. So we ended up with Marina Rodriguez, Amanda Lemos. But again, this fight night actually turned out to be very exciting. I'm only going to go over 3 fights, but I did want to give a quick shout out to 3 other fighters. Tamaris Vidal, awesome knee to the body to drop Ramona Pascal in her debut in the UFC. She looks to be very, very talented. Ramona Pascal is very tough. She hasn't had the best success in the UFC, but she is a tough opponent to face. But Tamaris was up to the challenge in her UFC debut, getting that TKO victory. Also, Polyana Viana with a nasty combination to KO Jinyu Fry. I mean, you don't see a lot of strawweight knockouts, especially in that fashion where a fighter is legitimately out cold. That was an unbelievable knockout. Very entertaining fight. Congratulations to Polyana Viana. And lastly, Mario Batista with an impressive submission win. He had the reverse triangle armbar going on. That was a very impressive win over Benito Lopez, Benito Lopez is the real deal. He's a very good fighter. He had a really big war with... I am blanking on his name for some reason right now. Michael Morales, I believe it is. But so I was thinking this was going to be a very close fight, but Mario Batista came out and did his business. But now for a little bit of a deeper dive into some of the bigger fights. First off, in the flyweight division, Tagir Ulanbekov taking on Nate Maness. This was a complete domination on the end of Ulanbekov. Nate Maness did look like he had a rough weight cut, but did say that it was actually okay, made some jokes about it. He posted a picture of a scale that said 178 pounds, and people actually thought he gained up to 178 pounds. I can promise you, he did not gain up to 178 pounds. That's not legal. I think the legal in the MMA world is like 28 pounds you can gain till the next day. So he was not 178 pounds going into that fight. It was all a joke. But it sounded like he was doing okay despite how he looked after that weight cut. Nonetheless, though, Tagir did have a bit of an advantage over Maness in this fight, considering Maness's last fight was against Ulanbekov's teammate in Umar Nurmagomedov, who was in his corner, in Ulanbekov's corner for this fight. So he did have just a tiny bit of an advantage. I mean, obviously, Umar and Tagir Ulanbekov are 2 different fighters, so I can't sit here and say that it was a huge advantage, but it was somewhat of an advantage. But again, he just dominated this fight. He was able to secure the guillotine choke, get the victory over the grappler Nate Maness. That was very impressive from what I saw by Ulanbekov to get that submission victory over a jiu-jitsu guy like Nate Maness. So congratulations to Ulanbekov. He might find himself back in the rankings. Not 100% sure. He just got knocked out by Muhammad Makayev. So we'll have to wait and see what whoever does the rankings, if they put him back into the rankings this week. And then the second fight I want to talk about, the co-main event, Neil Magny taking on Daniel Rodriguez. A very good back and forth fight between these two. Magny, who is typically a late starter, he likes to have a really good big feeling out process, especially in the first round. But he came out and had a really good first round. He landed 17 more strikes. He secured 2 of 3 takedowns attempted in the round. So, I mean, he very clearly, without a doubt, Neil Magny won the first round. Second round came, and that was a really close round. Both guys were separated by I believe, 4 strikes in the entire fight. I personally had it for Daniel Rodriguez. I had it going 1-1 going into the third round. But I could definitely see if people did have it for Magny still, just because, I mean, it was really a toss-up round. Then the third round came, and Neil Magny took it to a whole nother level. I mean, he just completely controlled that entire third round, almost tripled the amount of strikes, landed 3 of 4 takedowns attempted, and then capped it off with the Darce choke victory, not leaving it in the hands of the judges. He made sure that he was winning that fight, and I saw Li Jingliang, who, of course, lost a very, very close decision to Daniel Rodriguez, where a lot of people thought Li Jingliang won that fight. I saw him tweeting about Magny making sure it didn't go in the hands of the judges, stuff like that, that he was watching the fight closely to make sure they didn't hand Daniel Rodriguez another win, stuff like that, just joking around. But, hey, fantastic win for Magny, and I love that he called out Gilbert Burns. Do I think that fight is going to happen? Absolutely not. The UFC is not putting Gilbert Burns versus Neil Magny. But I do love the fact that a guy who just never turns down fights, you put Neil Magny in front of anybody and he will fight them. I mean, it's the perfect example earlier this year against Shavkat Rakhmonov. Shavkat has destroyed everybody that he's faced. Everybody is scared to face Shavkat Rakhmonov. Neil Magny steps up and faces him. He came out on the losing end of that one. But hey, I love calling out the big names, the top 5 contenders like Gilbert Burns. Probably won't happen, but still a very fun call out for the veteran. And congratulations, most wins in welterweight history in the UFC. Just got his 20th win. So big, huge congratulations to Neil Magny, a true legend of the sport. And it sounds like he's going to keep going. He doesn't sound like he's slowing down, getting a big win over another ranked opponent. So, hey, good for Neil Magny. I love to see it. And then last but not least, the main event, big strawweight matchup. Marina Rodriguez, the number 3 contender, probably 1 win away from a title shot, finally. Long overdue, in my opinion, taking on Amanda Lemos, who has been kind of up and coming. She did hit a little bit of a roadblock with Jessica Andrade earlier this year, but had a good comeback fight against Michelle Waterson-Gomez. So she was game for this fight. She had a very impressive performance in this fight, too. Marina was right there as a top contender in this division, and Amanda Lemos stood toe-to-toe with her. So that was a big step up for Amanda Lemos, especially after her big loss earlier this year. The first round was very clearly a feeling out process. Both ladies didn't do a whole lot. I believe the ending numbers were like 11-12 in terms of striking, so kind of a toss-up when it comes to that round. Second round, Lemos got a takedown, controlled for a good majority of the round. Amanda Lemos probably won that second round very clearly. And then the third round, Lemos came out throwing bombs. She landed a good one, rocked Marina Rodriguez, and then she started throwing this flurry of strikes while Marina Rodriguez stood there in the corner with her hands up, and Jason Herzog stopped it for the standing TKO victory. Now, a lot of people have a big problem with that stoppage. I've seen quite a bit of back and forth. It seems like it's kind of half and half when it comes to that stoppage. In slow motion, the stoppage definitely looks early. It's definitely an early stoppage in slow motion when you see that Amanda Lemos did miss on a few of those strikes. She wasn't landing very cleanly on the bigger strikes that she did throw. But at the same time, when you look at it in real time and you're watching Marina Rodriguez cower in the corner with her hands up, and this is no disrespect to Marina Rodriguez. When I say cower, I don't mean that she was being a little baby and cowering in the corner. No, I mean she's getting bombs thrown at her. I'd be cowering in the corner, and I'm 100 pounds more than both of these ladies. But when you stand there in the corner, just putting your hands up while your opponent's throwing big strikes at you, it's going to get stopped. You got to move around. You got to try to get out of the corner. You got to throw some strikes back to try to alleviate some of the pressure. And when you don't do that and the fight gets stopped, I don't think you have a really good case for an early stoppage. You can't just sit there and take humongous strikes, even if you are standing. We've seen plenty of standing KOs, or TKOs, I should say, where the guy is barely standing or the female's barely standing. And this was one of those cases where Marina Rodriguez was just standing there in the corner, not doing anything. The fight's going to get stopped when that kind of stuff happens. Tough ending, but I'm okay with the stoppage. It wasn't a great stoppage, but it also wasn't a bad stoppage. It was just kind of it was a toss-up because who knows? Maybe Amanda Lemos lands a big strike and Marina Rodriguez is out cold, and then we're talking about, was it too late of a stoppage? Should have been stopped earlier. So it's a tough position for someone like Jason Herzog. He's a veteran of the reffing business. I trust that Jason Herzog saw something that made him stop that fight. So I'm going to go with what Herzog has to say. I think it was an okay stoppage. Next, I want to talk about what I think is next for the women's strawweight division, because we just got really confused. Basically, all Marina Rodriguez had to do in this fight was win. And she was, without a doubt, I mean, there was a clear cut, boom, Marina Rodriguez, winner of Yang Weili, Carla Esparza next week, which I will get into in a little bit. But the UFC is now in a weird position because Amanda Lemos won. A lot of people think Rose Namajunas should have another fight before a title fight, trying to win her title back. I agree with that. I don't think Rose should get another title fight after that performance that she gave against Carla Esparza. Marina Rodriguez obviously lost. I'm skipping over Yang Weili because obviously Yang Weili is about to fight for the title. Jessica Andrade is fighting at flyweight in January. She doesn't really even seem to be going. Jessica Andrade, and this is no disrespect to her at all, I think she's phenomenal. I think she's one of the best women's fighters the UFC has ever seen, but she doesn't seem to be really title chasing anymore. She's just kind of, all right, I'll fight at strawweight. Now I'll fight at flyweight. Now she's going to... It's just kind of weird what Jessica Andrade is doing. I'm not really sure what's going on with that. So I don't really see her getting a strawweight title fight. Yan Xiaonan, yeah, she just beat Mackenzie Dern, but before that lost to Carla Esparza and Marina Rodriguez. You don't give someone a title fight after that. Lemos may need another win before a title shot, since she lost to Andrade earlier this year. It's going to be interesting. I truthfully don't know what the UFC will do. The two options, and again, this is what I think the UFC will do. I may not agree with what I'm going to say, but I think this is what the UFC is going to do. I think they're either going to give Yan Xiaonan the fight, because she's the highest ranked coming off of a win, or Amanda Lemos. I mean, she beat the best fighter out of everybody. She beat Marina Rodriguez. Marina Rodriguez was the number 3 contender. I don't know. Those are the two most likely options that I see personally. Slash the two options I'd probably be the most okay with. Because obviously, like, Marina Rodriguez isn't getting a title shot. She just lost. I don't know. I don't see if Yang Weili wins, I don't see a rematch of Carla Esparza and Yang Weili, because Carla Esparza really she didn't win the championship. Rose Namajunas lost the title. So the women's strawweight division is just a mess right now. It'll be very, very interesting to see what the UFC does with that division going forward. But now let's get into some UFC 281 predictions. I have 7 fights that I'm going to be predicting. That's the most I've had in a long time, prediction-wise. But this pay-per-view is just stacked beyond belief. I had to choose the ones that I felt deserved a prediction, a spot on this show, and honestly, I think 7 of the fights, half the fights do. Starting off, the first fight is between 2 ranked women's flyweights, Erin Blanchfield and Molly McCann. I'm very excited for this fight. 2 rising contenders in the flyweight division. Erin Blanchfield has looked absolutely phenomenal in her 3 UFC fights, and really her whole career. Her only loss in her career was back in Invicta in 2019, I believe it was, against fellow flyweight contender Tracy Cortez. And that was, again, 3 years ago that fight happened, and she lost. And okay, she's still 9-1. That's the only loss of her career. She's undefeated in the UFC. She's taken on Molly McCann, who has looked absolutely great as of late. 2 highlight reel knockouts this year. KO back in March with a spinning elbow, and then another spinning elbow. This one didn't fully knock out her opponent, but she did follow up with some punches in July, getting 2 straight KO victories. Also a 3-fight win streak. She did have a little bit of a drop when she lost 2 straight. One of those was to a top 5 contender, former title contender, Talia Santos. So, I mean, it's kind of tough with a loss like that on your resume. I see Blanchfield trying to use her grappling a bit more. I think she has a bigger advantage in the grappling department. Molly McCann can hold her own on the ground without a doubt, but I think Erin Blanchfield is the better grappler. I think Molly McCann's the better striker in this fight. I think it's going to be really close. I think Blanchfield will be able to take this fight to the ground. I think she will be able to control her. I'm going Erin Blanchfield by decision. Next fight up, Dominic Reyes taking on Ryan Spann. Very excited to see Dominic Reyes come back in this fight. The former 2-time title contender who, yes, has lost 3 straight fights. Can't turn your eye from that. But all are against former or current champions. He lost a very close split decision to John Jones, arguably the greatest fighter in the UFC history. A TKO loss for the vacant title against Jan Blachowicz. And then the KO loss to Yuri Prohaska last year in May. I would say 9 out of 10, I would say 9.9 out of 10 light heavyweights are losing all 3 of those fights also. Maybe taking one of them. So I'm not being too hard on Dominic Reyes, is all I'm saying. He's a great fighter. We all know that. But Ryan Spann, always a tough veteran to face, who was on a great run through the UFC. He was winning a bunch in a row before going 2-2 in his last 4 fights. Both guys are fairly well-rounded. Spann does have an advantage in the grappling department, but Dominic Reyes has fantastic takedown defense. I believe it's 80% right now, so he defends 4 out of 5 takedowns attempted on him. I think this fight is going to be a great comeback fight for Dominic Reyes. I think he gets a finish, too. I'm going Dominic Reyes by 2nd round TKO. And now for the first fight of the main card, Dan Hooker taking on Claudio Puelles. A very, very intriguing matchup in the lightweight division. Dan Hooker has struggled a lot as of recent, losing 4 of his last 5, but all 4 fighters are top 5 in their respective division. We're talking Dustin Poirier, former interim champion, number 2 contender. Michael Chandler, number 5 contender, former title contender. Islam Makhachev, the champion of the lightweight division, and Arnold Allen, who is now, I believe, number 5 in the featherweight division. Claudio Puelles is one of the most dangerous jiu-jitsu artists in this division, if not the most dangerous jiu-jitsu artist, and that is coming from a division with Benil Dariush, with Mateusz Gamrot, Arman Tsarukyan, and of course the former champion Charles Oliveira. He has been on a roll since losing the Ultimate Fighter finale that he was in. I believe it was like season 3 of Latin American Ultimate Fighter. After that, he has won 5 straight, 3 of those coming from a knee bar. If Dan Hooker can keep this fight standing, he will have a huge advantage, and he does have pretty good takedown defense. I believe it's like 73, but all it takes is one takedown with Playas. I do believe Playas will be able to get this fight to the ground, and I think he wins this by third-round submission, probably taking Dan Hooker out of the rankings, probably inserting himself in the rankings. That's how I see this fight going. Claudio Playas is just so incredibly talented on the ground. I think he gets it done against Dan Hooker, whose confidence is just reeling right now, unfortunately for him. Next fight is Frankie Edgar, the legend, in his retirement fight. Almost a home fight. He's from New Jersey. He trains in New Jersey. So, I mean, it's not too far away from Madison Square Garden in New York. Taking on the hard-hitting Chris Gutierrez. The future Hall of Famer, Frankie Edgar, comes in struggling mightily as of late, losing 5 of his last 7. Granted, all incredibly talented fighters. He has lost 2. And this is the order of the losses. So take that into consideration when some of these guys who aren't at the level they used to be, he lost to them when they were at that level. We're talking Brian Ortega, Max Holloway, Korean Zombie, Corey Sandhagen, and Cheeto Vera. All, I believe, top 7 in their respective weight classes. This guy is still a former longtime lightweight champ. He's a former title contender 2 times in the featherweight division. I don't see Frankie Edgar losing his last fight, especially near his home. While Chris Gutierrez is a very dangerous fighter, he hits extremely hard and can knock you out in a second. I just think the whole crowd, I think the whole atmosphere will get Frankie Edgar through this fight, and I have Frankie Edgar by decision with the win. And now this has got to be the most exciting fight on this whole card. And that's saying something considering the card that they're putting out. Dustin Poirier versus Michael Chandler. This is one of the most exciting fights the UFC can create. These 2 guys, these are the best of the best when it comes to this lightweight division. To be fully honest, I would pay for this pay-per-view if this was the main event. I would watch 5 rounds of Michael Chandler and Dustin Poirier as a main event. And I'm not one that usually likes main events that aren't title fights. I didn't like Jorge Masvidal and Colby Covington earlier this year, and I didn't like Nate Diaz and Khamzat Chimaev. Did it turn out to be okay, the second one, because it was Nate Diaz and Tony Ferguson? Yes, because those 2 guys are legends. I would have been okay with that, even if both of them aren't in the prime of their career anymore. I think it was a fun fight. But this is one of the few fights that if it was a main event, I would still buy the pay-per-view. 100%. That's how exciting this fight is. Dustin Poirier has been a staple in the top 5 of this division. He's won the interim title before. He's fought for the title twice. Came up short both times. One of the biggest stars in the UFC. While Michael Chandler has been one of the biggest attractions of the UFC since the day he joined. Since the day he beat Dan Hooker, Michael Chandler has been one of the biggest draws, and all he's done since joining the UFC has put on great fights. He beat Dan Hooker, very exciting. Lost to Charles Oliveira, still an exciting fight. He rocked Charles Oliveira. Then he lost to Justin Gaethje, and arguably one of the greatest fights in UFC history. And then he goes out and knocks out Tony Ferguson out cold with a front kick to the face. Unbelievable resume in 4 fights for Michael Chandler, and that's with him going 2-2 in those fights. Both guys are very capable of winning this fight, and I think it is a tough one to call. But all I know is that it is going to be an amazing fight to watch. I'm going with Michael Chandler by decision. Now, I'm saying decision because I just don't think one of these guys is going to get knocked out. These guys are both so incredibly tough. Both guys don't really get finished, especially in the striking department a lot. We saw both Dustin. Dustin has a history of against grapplers, and Michael Chandler's a decent grappler, but I see Michael Chandler playing more of the fun fight role than... I hate to say it like this because it's not like I'm saying that Michael Chandler doesn't want to win the fight, but Michael Chandler is more about the excitement than he is about doing the best things to win the fight. I mean, he does have the grappling background, but he hasn't really used it at all in the UFC. And that's talking him facing Justin Gaethje and Dan Hooker. So that's really all I'm saying. I see Michael Chandler trying to keep it on the feet for a while, maybe taking a few attempts at a takedown, but not a whole lot. I just think both guys are too tough to finish the other, but I am going Michael Chandler by decision, getting a huge win and maybe propelling him to another title shot. Next up, our first of 2 championship fights. The women's strawweight division title is on the line. Carla Esparza, Yang Wei Li. Carla, the champion, is heavily criticized for not being the most exciting fighter, but she does what she needs to do to get victories. She's a great grappler. She's a great wrestler, and she does what she needs to do. Yang Wei Li is one of the most dangerous, the most powerful, and honestly scariest strawweight I have ever seen in my entire life. Yang Wei Li will more than likely attempt to keep this fight standing up, considering, like I just said, the talent of Carla Esparza's grappling is unmatched in this division. Carla is just not up to par when it comes to striking, though. I think she's going to get caught by Yang Wei Li. Yang Wei Li hits incredibly hard for being 115 pounds. We just saw a video earlier this week of her picking up and carrying Francis Ngannou, the heavyweight champion. And she made it look easy. I mean, this guy's double her weight, and she's picking him up like he's nothing. That's the power that is behind Yang Wei Li. I think Yang Wei Li handles this fight very easily. I'm going Yang Wei Li by second round TKO. And now for the main event, another champion who is heavily criticized for not being the most exciting, but he's a striker. Israel Adesanya taking on his longtime rival in kickboxing, Alex Pereira. This is a rivalry that we've never seen Adesanya have in the UFC. He's talked his smack. He talks crap a lot, but he seems to always have at least a little bit of respect for his opponent. And not to say he doesn't respect Alex Pereira. I'm sure he respects him, but they don't like each other. Alex Pereira, as we know, has beat Israel Adesanya twice in kickboxing. This is MMA. This is a whole different world. I think this fight will be a bit different in terms of Adesanya being more active, because I think Pereira will advance more. A lot of people don't realize when they watch Israel Adesanya fight and they say he's so boring. Well, if you look at his most boring fights, it's the Yoel Romero, where Yoel Romero didn't advance. Jared Cannonier did not advance. Robert Whittaker in that second fight barely advanced. Those are his most boring fights, is when the other fighter does not advance towards him. When the other fighter advances towards him, he is active. Look at Paulo Costa, knocked him out. The first Robert Whittaker fight, knocked him out. Kelvin Gastelum that was the hardest fight he's had in the UFC. And Kelvin Gastelum almost beat him, but Israel Adesanya still came out on top, still landed some big strikes, and was able to pull out the victory. I think this is going to be detrimental for Alex Pereira. I think he's going to advance too much. I think he's going to go in a little bit too confident of, I've beat this guy twice, I can do it a third time. But like I said in the beginning, MMA and kickboxing are very different. Even if both of these guys are strikers, Israel Adesanya could take this fight to the ground for all we know, because he still has way better grappling than Alex Pereira does. I think I'm going Israel Adesanya, and I think he even gets a finish. I'm going Israel Adesanya to retain his title via 4th round TKO and finally close the book on this whole Alex Pereira rivalry that has transferred between two different combat sports. I think Israel Adesanya is a far better MMA fighter than Alex Pereira is. Alex Pereira is probably a better kickboxer, obviously. He beat him twice. But MMA world, I'm going Izzy all day. Just because Pereira doesn't have the big fight that Israel Adesanya has. He hasn't faced the level of competition that Israel Adesanya has. I just don't see Pereira any real way besides Pereira catching him and knocking him out that Pereira wins this fight. But that is all I have for you this week. Thank you all so much for listening. Next week, we'll have UFC 281 predictions. We'll also have UFC Fight Night. Derek Lewis taking on Sergey Spivak predictions. Probably not going to be talking about a whole lot of fights on that card. If anybody's mad about Marina Rodriguez and Amanda Lemos fight card, do not look at the Derek Lewis versus Sergey Spivak fight card because it might even be worse than that one. But that's all I have for you this week. Thank you all again for listening. You can find me at Monday Night Fight Talk on Instagram, at MN Fight Talk on Twitter. Next week, we'll see you same time, same place. Monday nights, 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time for Monday Night Fight Talk.